Each type of disaster presents unique challenges, and in these critical moments, logistics plays a pivotal role. Immediate responders and long-term recovery teams require the right tools, space, and equipment. They also need a place to stay, gas for their vehicles, food, water, and, well, you get it. Logistics professionals are the unsung heroes. Their behind-the-scenes efforts ensure that responders can focus on their jobs helping others. Today, we talk with Angela Ruth Corbett. She has extensive experience in disaster response logistics and can shed light on the many challenges involved in setting up and supplying disaster sites. She is widely recognized as a leader and innovator. I met Angela while she worked at a major insurance company, and today she's working for a major power company. In addition to comparing and contrasting the logistics needs for an insurance company versus a power company, Angela shares real-life experiences which help emphasize the need for planning, teamwork, and communications. And of course, being creative doesn't hurt either. So next time you see a power line being repaired or a claim adjuster assisting after a disaster, you'll know about the intricate logistics web that supports them. This is Kevin Peterson. Welcome to Weather Heroes. Well, Angela, thank you for joining us today at Weather Heroes. You and I met quite a while ago working in the insurance business. Tell me a little bit about your role. Maybe how long were you in that role and what types of disasters were you involved with?
Well, thank you, Kevin, for having me. I appreciate that. I worked at an insurance company for 25 years. The 4 states that I had were Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and South Carolina. And those are full of all kinds of weather type events, whether it be ice storms or tornadoes or hurricanes. But my role in that was to work with our claims adjusters and do whatever they needed to do to get an auto site or a fire site open. That would be for the adjusting of cars or the homes that were destroyed in any storm. So that is my goal, was to make them be able to work.
You now work at a major power company, and I understand they've used some of your talents or your talents in the, should I say, coordination and logistic world a few times. What did you see as some of the similarities and some of the differences in coordinating some of those activities for a power company versus an insurance company?
The things that you need will be the same in so many different scenarios for an insurance company and a power company. The biggest difference between them is that in an insurance company, you're going down there and you're setting up potentially offices, and you might be there 6 months. If it's a hurricane, you're there more long term. Whereas from the power company perspective, once we get the power on, then we're gone. So that might be in larger storms, 7 to 10 days. It might be 2 to 3 days. So everything is definitely more mobile and quick. As far as the urgency of it, I feel like the urgency is the same in an insurance company and a power company. It helps to have the power company on your side and getting that power up quickly. But in the insurance company, we did plan to have generators and things in case the power company could not get the power on. But as far as the food and the accommodations and the supplies, all of those things, pretty much the same from an insurance company to the power company.
I know we've talked in the past about some of the, approaches to accommodations, and really with the power company, they're out there before things are even open yet. So anything about where people, are they sleeping in their truck or what's going on with that?
Right. So in the power company perspective, most of it is from the power trucks. And so we would get staging areas. It could be a football field parking lot, any major parking lot. So we would pull in all of the line trucks. We would bring in the line trucks and we would gas them up. So they would go out on their storm duty early in the morning, and then they would come back at night. So occasionally they would come back to the staging site for food because we had that there, but it was mainly staging 500 to 600 trucks sometimes in a parking lot. So that sounds kind of easy, but it's really not, because you've got these major line trucks that have to be parked in a certain small area, and you have to stage them for them when they come in of how they go out. And then you also have to fuel all of those trucks at nighttime while the linemen are sleeping and, our folks are fueling up those trucks. So it's a little different as far as where they're sleeping. Typically, linemen, they might be in sleep trailers. They might be in a sleep tent with a bunch of cots. I've seen them go to schools and be in a gymnasium. Just depends on where they get. Now, obviously, sometimes they get in hotel rooms in storms where it's not as massive of a storm situation where there's no accommodations, but they are definitely used to having that sleeping in a tent or a bunker or wherever, or in their trucks.
So I would think that most people are very excited to see the power company come out and get their power up and running. And I know most folks are usually pretty happy to see their adjuster and to get paid for their damages. So two very popular people, right? And you've worked for both
Right.
now.
Right. It's been exciting to see both of the avenues to that, because you definitely want to have your money from your insurance company perspective to get the money flowing, but that power is critical. Luckily, with the insurance company, we did a lot of pre-planning to make sure that in case the power company, was not able to provide it, that we had power to set up our systems.
What are other things from maybe both a pre-planning standpoint, but also as the event is unfolding, were some of your main responsibilities?
So from a pre-planning standpoint, our goal was to be ready to hit the road as soon as a storm hit. And as soon as we were told by the catastrophe folks, this is where the site is and this is where you need to go. So in part of that, we would look for sites, office spots, as well as parking lots, because we needed offices for our fire adjusters, but then we needed more mobile sites for our auto adjusters for them to pull the cars through. So the pre-planning was, we worked with a couple of large lumber companies, home improvement stores, to use their parking lots. And we had a site agreement where we could go there anytime and just get approval from the manager. We also did site searches for offices. It might be, one time we even used a funeral home. We've used a skating rink, just whatever is empty that you can kind of put a list on to have a list of empty sites in an area that you might normally go to. If it's on the coast, we definitely had a lot of empty sites on the coast. So the planning was getting that. And then also from a manpower perspective, we had lists of folks, nationwide that were willing to help us. So if we had a storm on the coast, a hurricane, then we might have somebody coming from Seattle, Washington or something to help us. So our insurance company had a lot of people. So that was part of the pre-planning, that you're on standby and you can come help. Then I had a personal team that were the first initial boots on the ground, and it was about 8 technicians I had.
We also had a permanent office that you set up in Alabama where you kept supplies and kits, and you had another one over, I believe, in Atlanta area as well. So talk to me about some of those things that were over and above what probably a lot of other folks were doing.
Yeah, we set up what we called them visibility kits. So it was something that we could have pre-staged. So if somebody told me I needed an auto site in a certain location, I just had a site ready to go, a visibility kit. It might be our flag, it might be branded water, it might be lights or batteries. It included a lot of things, but it was just to have that ready to go for the next storm. And after every storm, we would then make the next kit so that it would be ready for the storm after that. It was crucial to have that, even things as little as the guys, my team, keeping a change of clothes in their car, because sometimes I would call them at 2:00 and say, I need you to go, on a 6-hour drive. And so they always had their clothes in their car ready to go. So sometimes it's the little things that give you that edge to make you be closer and to the site quicker.
Y'all also had a lot of tents, and there might be a story of a motorhome as well.
Yes. So we kept a lot of tents. The guys would, for our auto sites, we would just have those on our trailers. So all 8 vans had trailers with tents tucked on them. Occasionally, if we ran out of tents, then we would get a vendor to assist us with that. but most of the time we were able to use the tents we had. Now, that might be a white 20 by 20 or a 20 by 30, or sometimes we had what I would call a circus tent, very large tents, and it would depend on how big the tent was, is how much damage. So the larger the tent, the more lines we were running through from an auto adjusters and having those adjusters pull a car through and give them their estimate and potentially give them their check. So those are fun times to have. But as part of having those tents on that trailer, we had the visibility kits. We had everything that went with that, the lights, anything that from an IT perspective, anything that you needed was in that trailer for that initial setup.
Yeah, people don't really realize how important visibility is, letting folks know that we're there.
Yes.
I know we also had a lot of signage out there on motorhomes, and of course we had our branded motorhomes that came out of corporate, but I think we also did a lot of renting of motorhomes too.
Right. So our corporate office, this particular insurance company, had multiple vehicles. Occasionally we would be able to get those vehicles, but sometimes they might be in use in another area of the country. Sometimes it was a struggle to get those vehicles, and sometimes it was a struggle to get them in time because they might have to drive 24 hours to get to us. So we did supplement that with renting vehicles, but any motor vehicle, motor home per se, anyone that we got, once we got it, we would try to brand it so that our customers would know what insurance company we were and that, we were there to help. It was a struggle with different competing priorities, I would say, from people all over the country needing your help. And then from my perspective, is I needed it in my 4 states. So sometimes that was a struggle to get those, but we always made it where we could get the vehicles for them.
So a lot of the functionality of these motorhomes is inherent in their nature by the fact that they are mobile. So we can move them from place to place. Tell me a little bit about that.
We move vehicles around, and that's the beauty of a mobile site, is that you can take it to other places. If you finish up some of the work in one area and then you need some more resources in another one, then you can just move that vehicle and work those claims. But it was always, from a power company perspective, it wasn't as much about branding because everybody needs the power company. But from an insurance company, our goal was always to make sure that our customers knew that we were out there as soon as we could be and that we were giving out checks and trying to do whatever we could to get you back into the economy.
As we talk about staffing, I know we've talked about your teams, the teams from other states, also corporate resources and some of the vehicles they might send, as well as helping to organize people, but you also often worked with vendors. And I know there are several vendors that we relied on in the insurance business to make sure we had those things that we needed. You coordinating, again, all of that behind the scenes, making it flawless. Tell me about some of the vendors and what they provided.
Okay, so what I noticed over my 25 years of working storm duty is that prior to Hurricane Katrina, there was a lot of different vendors. There were ice vendors, there were tent vendors, there were food vendors, there were accommodations vendor. After Katrina, a lot of companies banded together and consolidated their resource and made kind of a one-stop shop for storm recovery. So we were lucky enough to have worked with a couple of these vendors that partnered up before Katrina and then used them after that with more of that one-stop shop. So I didn't have to call a porta potty vendor, a separate tent vendor, a separate accommodations vendor. I got to do a lot of things with one resource, and they had so many people that and they were doing it all the time, and it was not a side job for them. It was their primary job. Whereas in the past, when you call vendors, well, you're just somebody else that needs a porta potty, another vendor. So, but when you do it on that global scale, you get better service. So we had that kind of vendor, but we also had an electrician vendor that we had on retainer. So for every time that we had a storm, they were ready to bring generators to us. They were ready to bring fuel trucks. So we only had to call 2 or 3 vendors later on in this recovery process because they were on retainer with us. We also had an accommodations vendor, so they worked with us on getting hotel rooms wherever they were. We did some pre-planning and blocking rooms, but they did the day in and day out, so they helped us with getting the adjusters that were coming in and out. They were also very helpful with sometimes if you think you've got a hotel and you've blocked rooms and then a hurricane destroys the casino, that you had blocked 100 or 500 rooms. So they gave us some ideas of, do we rent a cruise ship? Or in one situation in Katrina, the hotels were completely gone. All the casinos that we had pre-blocked were gone. So we instead basically leveled a piece of land, brought in 200 rental vehicles, and we put our adjusters in those RVs. So it became known as the tent city, that allowed the adjusters to be on site there in Biloxi at the time, because if they had not had that, they would have had to have been driving from Jackson 2 and 3 hour drive just to even get to their work. So this provided them to be closer to the action and closer to the customers.
So there was just a lot of work involved there. I think that's almost as much work as everything else, trying to line all that information up.
Correct. It's all about building relationship with the vendors because they're more apt to give you better customer service if you have relationship with them all throughout the year. So that's very important in all of disaster recovery, is building relationships with vendors and with the partners that you're working with, the insurance managers that are telling you, okay, this is where we have the most claims. Or in a power company, this is where we have the most outages. So it's all about building those relationships with those people prior to that time so you can be more efficient when you are working together.
What processes were going on through your head as you're trying to match everything?
Typically, when a storm event was coming, such as a hurricane, we would have pre-planning calls with the insurance company, and that would be not just logistics folks like me. It would be with claims. It would be with PR. So we would plan where we were going to go, what we were going to do, things like that. On a tornado and a hailstorm, those come up, and so you just have to respond to that. So typically our zone catastrophe coordinator for this insurance company would have calls for that larger group and get everybody on the same page, from the media, from the advertising, from everything. Then after that, typically the logistics folks, we would try to get off the calls pretty quickly because we were the first persons that needed to be there. So if the claims people gave us an address, then we were on our way there. We also had logistics only conference calls, typically on a daily basis, where we would look at, if we had 17 sites set up, we would go through what was needed at each site for the day and what was good at that site or what we needed, things like that. So it was typically a communication every day. Unfortunately, during Katrina, a lot of the cell phone coverage was down. A lot of times we were just texting. I mean, it got to that point where we just had to text communication or drive 2 hours to finally be able to get some cell coverage. So it's always a struggle when the technology doesn't work. It's typically on that kind of thing, it's usually more the hurricanes. On tornadoes and hailstorms, it's usually more centralized in damage, and it's not as much where you can still get the technology service. I love technology when it works, and when it doesn't, it's very frustrating because you're depending on so many communications to get these recovery sites established. So that's one of the biggest conflicts that you would have on a site if your technology is not working.
There's always a lot of interest by the public and the government in these disaster sites after the event. So tell me about any government involvement that you had, be it state, local, or federal officials, during your response efforts.
Typically, we would, in the years before the storm, or we would do this on a yearly basis, we would get licenses and access passes to get into the storm area. They're only going to let a utility come in the beginning, But we were able, because of the insurance company's vitality and crucial way to get that money into the customer's hands, then we got some passes. Now, occasionally that didn't work, and they would still kind of hold us back because they were still trying to get trees out of the way or things like that. But we always tried to have those for our most important folks that could get in there and assess the damage. We also worked with FEMA on different things. FEMA is a great organization, and they are running the show basically from a disaster recovery. So we would strive to work with them. So occasionally they would usurp our authority. So if there was 2 stories where we had done our pre-planning, we had gotten our sites, we had gotten things on the road, such as a porta potty restroom station, basically. And FEMA came in and saw it, and they took it from us. We also had another site that we had tried to get, and we were about to sign the lease, and FEMA came in and took that because they needed it for their organization.
Yeah, I think I remember that story where one of your folks was standing at the site that he had just talked to somebody about, thought we were going to sign that deal, and a bunch of National Guard folks with rifles showed up, and he's like, well, I can't really fight this.
Yeah. Another vendor that we sometimes forget about is the security vendors. That was not as big a deal in some storms, but we always had security. So during Hurricane Katrina, there was martial law. There was so much, it was a very tense situation. So you needed to have security at your sites to just manage that process. People might try to even steal fuel out of your truck, your fuel truck, or various things where they're very tense at a site. They were always one of the first people that we called.
With so much coming at you from so many different directions, how did you and your team manage to balance all that? How did you prioritize? Also, what were some of your service goals time-wise?
Yeah, our goal was always to have a mobile site up within 24 hours of us being told where it was going to be, what area of the state. But for a physical facility, which was typically where our fire adjusters went, we could typically get that up within 3 days. And I'm talking about wiring, getting the furniture in, getting tables set up, getting electrical, getting communications lines, all of those things. So that was typically a 3-day goal to get that. And so, like I said, we had to get pretty imaginative when we did it in a gymnasium or a skating rink or a funeral home. The joke was that the funeral home, since it was an auto site, we called it the body shop, which was, kind of funny for us. You just had to take wherever you could get as the first. A lot of the sites that you thought you could get were damaged, and so you had to go to a skating rink or a funeral home.
So you did that for 25 years in the insurance business, and I know that 2 events that were probably the most memorable in your career were the April 2011 tornadoes that went through the Southeast, in particular the one that went through Alabama, as well as Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and both massive events. Katrina we could see happening, but we have some time to prepare, though no one could have imagined how bad that was going to be. But the tornadoes really kind of sprang out of nowhere. I mean, you have a little bit of warning, but to your point earlier, that's an instant response, and such a severe damage, so widespread. So tell me, if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple of stories around the 2011 tornadoes, as well as a couple from Katrina.
Well, I'll start with the tornadoes. So to give you a perspective of the competing priorities. So when on April 27, 2011, when that happened, when it broke out across Alabama and Georgia, multiple sites, multiple deaths during that day. The 6 weeks prior to that, we had a lot of hailstorms in South Carolina. So almost all of our resources, our tents, our vehicles were in South Carolina. So I was actually coming home for what I thought was going to be a rest after the 6 weeks of the hailstorms. And then the tornadoes came. So I can remember being in my house in the closet, talking to my boss and trying for us to figure out how we're going to deploy those resources now to Alabama. So that is part of the instant reaction that you have to have on a tornado or a hailstorm. Hailstorms are big for an insurance company, not for a power company. So getting those resources is always instant in those reactions. For Hurricane Katrina, there was some good stories there. There was virtually no infrastructure on the coast. So what we did when we were trying to get down there, so we were starting, for instance, in Jackson and then working our way down to Hattiesburg and then finally into Biloxi. So when I can remember starting in Hattiesburg, though, and trying to build an office, and we needed more parking. We needed parking for our adjusters, for our security guards, for our logistics folks, just to even get in and set up sites. But we were so limited because of the few spaces that we could go to. So I can remember bartering with one of the landlords who needed gas. And I said, well, I have a fuel truck. I'll give you gas if you will give me some of your parking spaces. So that's what you had to do on things like that. When the money system's not working, there's no cash, you just have to do some gentleman's agreements sometimes. Another thing I can remember from Katrina was that I think it was you, Kevin, that actually called me and said, well, I know there's no infrastructure down there at the coast, but I'm sending 800 adjusters there and I need you to provide them 3 meals a day starting tomorrow. So you always get those requests that, you're going to do your best and you just start making calls. And at the time before Katrina, before we had some of those larger vendors, we just had to go to the Yellow Pages and find those food service vendors that would do things for us and that would be willing to come and set up in a camper and start cooking for us in food trucks. So you just never know what the request is going to be, but you do your best to satisfy that. I can also remember another story where we were setting up a orientation center in Mobile. And it was a pretty large parking lot, but we were setting up, getting ready for our adjusters to come. And that was back in the days when we had pagers and block phones. It was still raining from the storm. Apparently, a transfer truck had parked. And we were all inside. They're trying to get the place ready. It was probably, 60, 70,000 square foot building. And lo and behold, the truck's brakes come loose and it rolls into the orientation center and it causes a fire. There's rain coming down and we're still trying to get, our adjusters to have because at the time, back in the day, an adjuster didn't have a cell phone. He didn't necessarily have a pager. So we would always issue all of those things to them. So when you have a truck come into your orientation center, that messes all of that up and it delays it. But again, you work around it, you get it fixed, you have the resources around you to fix that. You just never know what somebody's going to ask you to do when you go on storm duty.
What is an orientation center?
An orientation center for us was, and it has evolved over the years, in the 25 years. In the beginning, it was I getting your pager, your cell phone, sometimes it would be your instructions. Sometimes we would do training. So there might be particular things in a certain area that the adjusters that were coming in from other parts of the states needed to know the right way to handle a claim in the state of Alabama or Mississippi. So that training sometimes came on that. But it was getting food, it was getting bottled water, it was getting supplies, all of these things that we would bring adjusters in. And also we would give them cars back in the day. Sometimes, people would fly in from other places and we would have a rental car ready for them to go. Because I can remember pulling in many semis of rental cars back in the day. Over time, that has evolved and most people had their own car that they would drive to the site. But it's mainly to get those adjusters ready to go and have them equipped with what they need to go out and do an adjustment on a claim.
So any other stories around the 2011 tornadoes? You are from Alabama, and that was pretty close to home for you as you tell your story about being trapped in the closet.
Yeah, there was a lot of stories that day of everything, but it was just amazing to actually see that for the first time. It was happening to me versus happening to other people, and I could see the storm coming on the TV, and that was the first time in my 25 years that I was scared. I was single in the closet with my dogs, and it really made it more meaningful to me to know, if I'm feeling this way, then how are all the other customers out there that I've helped over the years, but now I'm really understanding, okay, they were scared. So I did enjoy doing that. I was very focused on catastrophe. Storm duty was always my primary goal. I would drop everything to help the customers because I then realized, okay, this is what it means. I can remember from the 2011 tornadoes, just so many RVs that we put out there. I mean, I think we had 27 or 28 in different states. There was just so much. It was just all of a sudden they were all over the place. Whereas in the hurricane, you're pretty much centralized to the coast. Most of the stuff is at the coast. But the April 27th tornadoes, they went at all over the state of Alabama in different spots, all over Georgia in different spots, and some even in Mississippi, some in Tennessee, I think. But it's much more of a struggle for that to get the places because you're sending all your resources in so many different places, and it takes you longer to get there. So that was a real thing to me.
Any other memories from Katrina or the April 2011 tornadoes that you would think that you'd like to share?
I guess the biggest thing for me was, I think it was in Mississippi, when a little girl came up to me. And at the time, one of our branding things was teddy bears. And that is something that we gave, coloring books we gave to customers. It helped the children feel better. But I can remember this one particular little girl, me giving her that. And that was not part of my job typically because I was usually handling logistics, but I was able to do that with her, and she just cried. And her mom and her dad, they had lost their home, they had lost all the cars. It was, they were devastated. But when she smiled after giving her the teddy bear, and that just makes it all worth it.
You're not going to find a more caring and dedicated person than Angela. Catastrophe situations can be very stressful, and Angela has always been the voice of reason. I hope you enjoyed spending some time with her. I know I did. Take care, and thanks for joining us on Weather Heroes.